位盖亚科普讲座的线上听众，大家好，很高兴又来到了每月一度的讲座，我是主持人，中央大学网络学习科技研究所施如玲。今天邀请到的讲者是个语言专家，我有一种被期末考的感觉，生怕我的破英文呢被专家来检视，所以思考了许久，我决定今天要来用中文介绍讲言。那我们今天邀请到的讲者呢是钟玉桥老师，他是来自伦敦大学金匠学院 Goldsmith University of London 教育学系的访问研究学者。钟老师呢，他在伦敦大学国王学院取得英语教育的学士及教育的硕士，并且在金匠学院获得他的双语及多语博士学位。那他的研究呢，聚焦在双语及多元文化主义、第二语言学习的理论及方法，还有这个语言教室它里面怎么样去发挥创意、学习的现场，以及数位学习跟线上教学的一些方法。那他同时呢，也提供国语及英语教学的教师培训。那钟老师在英国的工作，据我私人的了解呢，是非常的有趣。那除了在大学里面任教，那也执行了全球多媒体叙事的一些展演跟研究的专案。那我们台湾呢，也曾经有许多的国中小老师带领着孩子，那拍摄在地的影片去参展。那他们的研究跟研习的场次非常的多元，那带着孩子透过影片，那分享多元文化的议题。这样子的研究跟推广的活动呢，对于他身为一个这个语言研究的学者，也是一份很重要的工作跟贡献。那现在台湾大力的推广双语环境，在大学里面呢，也在推动 EMI， 也就是使用英语为工具的专业教学。那我想今天的讲座除了对正在学习外文的年轻学子非常有帮助，那对于身为大学端的这些老师们呢，了解一个人如何面对跟学习不同的语言，其实更能够帮助我们去做英语授课，那去了解怎么样的方法可以得出什么样的效果。那现在呢，我们就不浪费时间，我们邀请钟老师来跟我们谈一谈双语学习中的社会文化及心理反应，那跟我们说说英语学习的一些原理、原则与策略。那欢迎钟老师。
谢谢。我先来播放我的影片。Okay, thank you, Professor Shih, for inviting me here. As the lovely introduction done by Professor Shih, I'm Yu-Chiao, working in Goldsmith, University of London. I'm a research co-director of Multilingual Digital Storytelling Project. In this project, we explore the significance of development of digital storytelling project. And we look at the development in the digital media for understanding of literacy and language learning, and how can our multilingual digital storytelling project encourage young people's voice, support marginalized communities, and promote active citizenship. I also lecture on BA and MA modules covering different topics, but I focus on bilingualism and multilingualism. Today, it's my great honor to be here to be working with you on language learning and acquisition and the shift of theories of bilingualism, and look at being bilingual from the sociocultural as well as psychological perspectives. Right. As we all know, language is central to the human condition, and it is the most salient distinguishing characteristic of our species. Language has a strong link with culture and identity. It implies someone to talk to, a communicative intent, a linking of the individual to others. And due to the recent rapid advancement in mobility and technology, the forces of globalization and super diversity are experiencing a notable surge, which have given rise to multilingual and multicultural societies. Okay, right. We are going to start by clarifying these terms. So the first one is monolingual. Monolingual refers to the condition of being able to speak only one single language, as opposed to multilingual. The second term is bilingual, which is about a person or community that speaks two languages. And the third term here is multilingual. It means to be in or using several languages to describe situations wherein multiple languages exist side by side in a society, but are utilized separately. The final one is plurilingual, which stresses the ability of a person who has competence in more than one language. I also want to clarify first language, which we sometimes call it as language 1, and second language, language 2. From the words, first language is the language that someone learns to speak first. And then the second language is a language spoken in addition to the first language. There are 4 classic main theories of language acquisition. The first one is behavioral theory proposed by Skinner. He argued that children learn language first by imitating their caregivers, usually the parents, and then modifying their use of language due to apparent conditioning. Sorry. And the second theory here I would like to mention is cognitive theory proposed by Piaget. Children are born with little cognitive ability, but their minds develop and build new schemas, which is idea and understanding of how the world works. As they age and experience the world around them, eventually they can apply language to their schemas through assimilation, which means fitting new information into what is already known, and accommodation. The third theory is nativist theory proposed by Chomsky. He's argued that children are born with an instinct or a drive for language learning, which he calls the language acquisition device, shortened as LAD. Therefore, there must be an innate biological component to language acquisition. The final one I would like to mention here is the interactionist theory proposed by Brunner. He suggested that children are born with an ability to develop language, but they require regular interaction with their caregivers or teachers to learn and understand it to a level of full fluency. Okay, so we can see this table here. We can see the comparison of first language versus second language acquisition. First language acquisition is children's acquisition of their native language, while second language acquisition is learning a language after acquiring the mother tongue, their first language. So while acquiring the first language, it is a subconscious progress. And then the second language, it is an active and conscious progress and learning. So in learning the first language, it doesn't really need instructions or explicit education. while learning a second language, it do require instructions and explicit education. In terms of the first language, we can all probably achieve native fluency. However, learning a second language, sometimes it's very difficult to reach native fluency. Sorry? Okay, so the next one, now we are going to move on to the evolution of construction of linguistic interdependence between first language and the second language. The interdependence hypothesis elaborated in papers published in 70s and 80s. So the earliest one is SUP, separate underlying proficiency model. As you can see here in this image, the first language proficiency is separated from the second language proficiency. It reflected a lot of time the typical set of assumptions underlying opposition to bilingual education in the United States in the 70s and 80s, namely that minority students' proficiency in first language is separate from their proficiency in English, which would be their second language at that time. Consequently, knowledge and skills learned through language one were not transferred to English, their second language. Later on, there is CUP model, which is common underlying proficiency. As we can see in this image, in this model, input in either language can promote development of the proficiency underlying both languages. Literacy-related aspects of the bilingual student's proficiency in language 1 and language 2 are seen as common as independent across languages. Here is another model. This hypothesis represented as a dual iceberg posits that every language contains surface features. So as you can see here, we have a first language feature and second language feature. However, underlying those surface manifestations of language are proficiencies that are common across languages. All of this research evidence suggests 6 major types of cross-linguistic transfer that will operate in varying ways depending on the sociolinguistic and educational situation, as well as languages. You might find some of the following types of transfer don't really occur between English and Mandarin Chinese. Let's have a look. So the first transfer is the transfer of conceptual elements, such as understanding of the concept of photosynthesis or being happy, being frustrated. The second one is the transfer of specific linguistic elements. So, for example, the knowledge of the meaning of photo in photosynthesis. The third kind of transfer is of more general morphological awareness. So the awareness of the function of Shen, T-I-O-N, in acceleration in English and acceleration in French. I can't speak French. I try to learn it, but I still can't pronounce it properly. But as you can see, Shen here. Okay, the fourth kind is the transfer of phonological awareness, the knowledge that words are composed of distinct sound. The fifth kind of transfer is of metacognitive and metalinguistic learning strategies. For example, the strategies of visualizing, the use of graphic organizers, vocabulary acquisition strategies, etc. The last kind of transfer is the transfer of pragmatic aspects of language use. For example, the willingness to take risks in communication through second language, the ability to use paralinguistic features such as gestures or facial expressions to aid your communication. Right. Okay. Moreover, there have been a shift of the view of bilingualism. Traditional bilingualism is two separate rectangles that represent two languages and separate linguistic systems, language 1 and language 2, with linguistics feature 1 and feature 2. And then later on, a professor, Jim Cummins I think in Canada, brought the two linguistic systems closer and proposed that there is a transfer between the two. It's stemming from the common underlying proficiency that we mentioned earlier, but still delineating separate language 1 and language 2 and separate linguistic features. Okay, and then later on, recently, it has shifted to the dynamic bilingual model. There is only one linguistic system with features that are integrated throughout. Dynamic bilingualism goes beyond the notion of two autonomous languages, of a first language and a second language, and of additive or subtractive bilingualism. Right, so I have a question for you, but you answer by yourself in your mind, okay? Are you bilingual? Take myself for an example. If I'm asked this question, I think I am bilingual, but I'm not a balanced bilingual. So if a person is asked whether he or she speaks two or more languages, the question is quite ambiguous, right? Because a person may be able to speak two languages, but tends to speak only one language in practice. Sometimes a person may regularly speak two languages, but competence in one language may be limited. Or another person will use one language for conversation and another for writing and reading. The essential distinction is therefore between language ability and language use, the degree and function. As I just showed you, bilingualism is a simple term that hides a complex phenomenon. Does this term, bilingualism, cover those who are able to speak the language but don't? Those who understand what others say in one of their languages but rarely or never use that language? Those who can speak a language without literacy. Here, I would like to use my children for an example because I live in the UK and then my husband is English. My children were born in the UK and they are now 10, 12, and 14 years old. I try very hard to keep their Mandarin going. If you speak to them, their speaking and listening is quite fluent, I would say, but they can't recognize anything. So they can't recognize any Chinese characters. So are they bilingual in that way? And those who speak, read, and write in both languages, and also those who are proficient in one language but only just beginning to learn a second language. Are this kind of people considered being bilingual? Here, I would like to clarify a second language a bit more. So what is a second language? A second language can mean the second language learned chronologically. So after you learn the first language, the second language you learn is called the second language. Or a second language can refer to the weaker language. Or it can also mean the language that is not the mother tongue, or even the less used language, or even actually the third and the further languages. Also, a language widely spoken in a country of the learner as opposed to a foreign language. So such question, going back to my original question, are you bilingual? This question highlights that there are different dimensions of language and language learning. We can examine people's ability in 2 or more languages, in their listening, understanding, their speaking, their reading, and writing skills. And also there are variations, such as being fluent in both languages and to start to learn a second language. As I mentioned, some people can be balanced bilingual, but most bilingual people are more competent in one language than another. Bilinguals sometimes find it easier to use one of their languages in one set of circumstances, another language in a different set of circumstances. Do you agree if you can speak 2 languages? Take myself for an example. I can speak Mandarin, of course, my mother tongue, and I can speak English. But when I am delivering academic talk or academic presentation, I prefer to do it in English because I've learned everything in English. It would be a struggle for me to present it in Mandarin because I can't translate all of these terms. But while I'm talking to friends, I'm happily to chat in Mandarin. Okay. Languages often have different uses in different places with different people, right? So I always speak Mandarin to my Taiwanese friends in the UK. I don't speak English to them in the UK. And these changes over time as age, as your experience, as geographical location, as your work, your family, and friends. Now we are going to look at what contributes to bilingual. It can be family, like my example, or for some people, the parents speak different languages or even different dialects. Their children can be bilingual or even multilingual. And the society can contribute to bilingual, as what the Taiwanese government is trying hard to push the society to be a bilingual society by 2030. Also, immigration can contribute to bilingual. If you move somewhere, you need to be able to speak the local language there. And mobility, as I mentioned earlier. It's very easy for people to travel to different places. And also it's very normal to see people from different countries everywhere. I have a diagram here for you. It's the different sides of learning. Here, I place the learner in the center. And we can see the learner can learn from different sides. Of course, the learner can learn from school, but not just limited to school. A learner can learn from family, from media, from online, and from community. Next, we are going to look at individual use of bilingualism. As I just show you from the diagram and what we just talked about, language cannot be divorced from the context in which it is used. Language is not produced in a vacuum. Rather, it is enacted in changing dramas as props and scenery and setting, audience, the co-actors, actresses, the play and the role change. So does language. Therefore, a pure linguistic or psychological approach to two language competencies is not sufficient. Our communication includes not just the structure of language. When we are communicating with people, we don't just pay attention to the grammar or the vocabulary, but also who is saying what, to whom, and then in which circumstances. For example, one person may have limited linguistic skills, but in certain situations be successful in communication. Here, I would like to give you a quite interesting example. I used to take university students abroad from Taiwan I remember I took them to New York. And of course, their English was a bit limited at that time. But when they were arguing for their rights or they were arguing for, having some discount, they suddenly became very fluent. That's one situation. In the contrary, another person may have relative linguistic mastery, but through undeveloped social interaction skills or in a strange circumstance, be relatively unsuccessful in communication. The social environment where the two languages function is crucial to understanding bilingual usage. Okay, an individual's use of their bilingual ability, which is called functional bilingualism, moves away from the complex arguments about language proficiency that tend to be based around school success and academic performance. Functional bilingualism moves into language production across an encyclopedia of everyday events. It concerns what I mentioned earlier, when, where, and with whom people use their two languages. Okay, the table below is just for your reference. I provide examples of the different targets, people, and contexts, often called domains, where functional bilingualism is enacted in different role relationships. So here, now we are going to bring everything together and consider how an individual becomes bilingual. It is the foundations of second language acquisition and learning. Theories of a psychological, socio-psychological, and pedagogic nature that highlight the major features of becoming bilingual via second language learning. Here, we need to consider 6 components. So the rationales for second language learning, the context that affects such learning, learner inputs and development, also the individual learner differences, the learning processes, and outcomes from second language learning. When we study an individual learner, individual differences cannot be solely ascribed to differences of social or economic or political environment and input from classroom teaching methodologies. Individual differences also relate to personal characteristics. So if you think about your process while learning a second language and think about what I'm going to say now and see if this is true, the age can affect your learning of a new language. We all believe that young children should start to learn another language when they are younger. And when we are, as an adult, it's quite difficult to learn a new language. So the age is an important factor here. Cognitive style, or the previous knowledge, or your learning style, your learning strategies, and also personality variables, such as anxiety, have variously been thought to influence second language acquisition. Also, the ability and aptitude, the attitudes, and motivation. I'm going to focus on motivation right now. As we all know, motivation is an important factor in learning as well as in second language acquisition, affecting the speed and final proficiency of the second language. So we need to think about what are the motives for learning a second language then. Are the motives economic, cultural, social, vocational, integrative, or for self-esteem and self-actualization? Reasons for learning a second language tend to fall into these two major groups. The first group is a wish to identify with or join another language group, which is called integrative motivation. This can be referred to, immigrants. When they move to different places, they need to learn the local language to be integrated, to have communication with the people there. And the second group of motivation can be learning for language for useful purposes, which is called instrumental motivation. So, for example, for studying, for doing your work, for business, for traveling, etc. Apart from the motivation, there are other important individual psychological factors in second language learning. These include possible language confusion when using the second language, so language shock, and also the feeling of stress, anxiety, because of the differences between the learner's culture and the target language culture, which we might have experienced the cultural shock. And also the degree of inhibition or self-consciousness. Adolescent learners in particular may have in language learning. They sometimes feel reluctant to present themselves in a language class. Such factors provide dimensions that may determine the amount of contact a language learner will have with the target language. So here, when social and or psychological distances are very large, the learner may fail to progress very far in learning a second language. Instead, when the social and psychological factors are positive, the distance are very small, second language acquisition may occur relatively painlessly. Here, this is quite an important affective filter hypothesis. What is an affective filter? This was proposed by Juling and Bird in 1977 with the idea that there is a filter that determines how much a person learns in a formal or informal language setting. The filter comprises affective factors such as attitudes to the language, the motivation, your self-confidence, and anxiety. Therefore, learners with favorable attitudes and self-confidence may have a low filter, which consequent efficient second language learning. On the contrary, those with unfavorable attitudes and or high anxiety have high filters, and so the input of second language learning may be blocked or impeded. So the affective filter influences the rate of development in second language learning and the level of success in becoming bilingual. Question and Terrell in 1983 suggested that teachers must ensure that learners do not become anxious or defensive in language learning. This relates to the affective filter hypothesis. So the view of bilingualism has always been regarded a positive thing, always thought to be really good. No, it's not true. So let's have a look. Bilingualism and cognition. In early days, people had the idea of, don't raise your children bilingually or problems will result. Predicted problems ranged from bilingualism as a burden on your brain. Your brain is only this big. It doesn't fit in so many languages. And also the mental confusion, inhibition of the acquisition of the majority language. It might cause identity conflicts and split loyalties, etc. And also, when we talk about bilingualism and intelligence, the early research on bilingualism and cognition tended to confirm this negative viewpoint, finding that monolinguals were superior to bilinguals on mental tests. This period of detrimental effects research lasted from approximately the 1920s to the 60s, quite a long time, while the dominant result was that bilinguals were inferior to monolinguals, particularly on verbal IQ. Can you see a problem here? These early studies share many serious methodological weaknesses, really. And then we came to the period of neutral effects. So there were a series of studies that reported no difference between bilingual and monolinguals in IQ. Then finally, here comes the period of additive effects. A major turning point in history of the relationship between bilingualism and cognition was reached by Peel and Lambert in 1962. they concluded that bilingualism actually provides greater mental flexibility, which includes the ability to think more abstractly, more independently of words. Also, that a more enriched bilingual and bicultural environment benefits the development of IQ. And also, moreover, that there is a positive transfer between a bilingual's two languages, facilitating the development of verbal IQ. There is another advantage of being bilingual, bilingualism and divergent creative thinking. A children regarded as a diverger is more creative, imaginative, elastic, open-ended, and free in thinking. Instead of finding the one correct answer, divergent thinkers prefer to provide a variety of answers, all of which can be valid. So example here, how many uses can you think of for a brick? How many interesting and unusual uses can you think of for tin cans? How many different uses can you think of for cardboard boxes? This is an experiment conducted by a researcher. And I also asked the same question in my MA class. I asked the students, my MA class of course have some local students. Also, I have a lot of international students. I asked them, how many different uses can you think of for cardboard boxes? Students with different linguistic backgrounds, with different cultural background gave me different answers. So what did they say? They talk about cardboard boxes. They thought they can use the boxes to move house, to be used as a storage, to play games, or to let children sit inside as their castle or something. But I proposed something that they didn't think of. So I said that in Taiwan, sometimes the weather can be very wet. There could be typhoons or maybe flood. Sometimes a lot of people use cardboard boxes to pave the floor to absorb the water and the moisture, which they didn't encounter. So different culture, different linguistic background can come up with different ideas. Okay, so the underlying hypothesis concerning creative thinking and bilingualism is that the ownership of two or more languages may increase fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration in thinking. Bilinguals will have two or more words for a single object or idea. Okay, so today we look at the interrelation between languages, cultures, and identities. And we discuss first language and second language and some learning theories. There are still a lot of theories I couldn't capture today. But if you are interested, you can look into that, which will be really helpful for your language learning. We also move on to look at the concept of bilingualism and the evolution of the concept of bilingualism. We further examined the psychological and sociocultural elements in learning a second language. So I would like to sum up the language learning today. I would like to sum up today that language learning cannot be isolated. It can't be just in a classroom. It's not just about the vocabulary, about the grammar. Rather, it is intertwined with humanities, with culture, with people, with your community. Now, I have some questions for you. Do you consider yourself as bilingual or multilingual? Does this change in different contexts? I think our society, Taiwan, is changing, which is very exciting. Although to start a policy might be quite painful, but it's really starting to make a difference. The image here is not menu. It's the menu, but a sign in a stand, in a store, in a night market in Taipei. It is bilingual for people who grow up here. For local people, it might not make any difference, but it's bilingual. So I'm very happy to see that my children or my husband, they always ask me what can they order. Sadly, because they can't read Chinese characters, they won't need my help anymore. They can order exactly what they want. And I could see a lot of people, from different cultures coming to visit Taiwan, which is really a good thing. Right. Okay. So that's some activities that you can think of. How many uses you can think of for a brick or cardboard box? That's what I mentioned earlier. And also, do you think your bilingualism, your monolingualism affects your creativity and your problem-solving skills? Right. Okay. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to stop sharing. Okay.
好，谢谢钟老师。我们今天呢，果然听到了英国腔的英文。那我们今天呢，其实也刚刚看到了钟老师提到的，就是语言学习它不仅仅是一个个体的认知，其实是它更是一个文化跟社会的一个交互作用。那白话一点的说法，就是说我们在使用语言的时候，其实是会随着社会环境而改变。那在美国就说美式的英文。在英国就会说英式的英文，到英国人就会讲很自然的流露出那种英国式的那种英文的这个样态。那甚至我们在大陆呢说中文就会开始卷舌。我想语言的使用跟一个展现，可能就是刚刚钟老师在讲的，就是它除了认知之外，还是一个社会跟文化的一个交互的作用。那等等呢，我们一方面其实我们要开始开放我们的 floor 哈，那让我们的今天的听众朋友跟钟老师可以直接的互动，用举手的符号来提问。那我们在等待这个听众朋友提问的同时呢，就是接着我刚刚说的，就说刚刚提到了 Translanguaging， 那 Translanguaging 它在英语学习上的这些意义跟实现的方法是什么？它这个字它本身是不是带着两个语言，当它在交互，也就是说我在课堂上又用英文又用中文的时候，它到底发生了什么事情？要不要跟我们很简短的说一下这个情况是什么？那这样的一个词是什么样的一个意思？那我们的听众朋友呢，也同时呢可以想一想我们的问题。那等一下用举手的这个符号来跟我们做提问。钟老师，
谢谢施教授。So translanguaging 我讲中文 ，translanguaging 就是 it's not translating different Translating is to word by word, line by line， 是不是翻译哦 ？Translanguaging 就是说你允许学生，或者是你允许在讲的人呢，讲者他突然想到一个字，他讲到一半，他讲英文讲到一半卡住了，那你容不容许他去用他熟悉的语言把它说出来？其实我觉得这是可以允许的。为什么呢？因为你这样才能让这个他要发表的这个沟通的意思达到他才能表达到他要沟通的意思。He can communicate what his thoughts to the full degree instead of just being stuck。好，所以有些老师像现在大家在做 EMI， 可能会说不行，我们要用全英文。但是你一开始你一定要让学生他卡住的时候，你允许他用他习惯的方式讲出来之后，你再用英文再去帮他做加强， 你说哦，你刚刚要讲的是这个，那你下次可以怎么说？我举一个例子，就是我家小朋友的例子。我家小朋友 because we channel has already been set up, they don't speak Mandarin they don't speak English to me. 他们绝对不会跟我说英文，即使我在跟他们讲英文的时候，他们一定跟我回答用中文。所以有一次呢，我家小朋友呢就说：“妈妈，我的肚子，我的肚子，我的肚子。”我说：“你肚子怎么了？”我的肚子很好笑，他就哭了。我想怎么会讲我的肚子很好笑呢？其实他要讲的意思就是说 ，My tummy is funny, I have a funny tummy， 就是他肚子痛。所以我就说哦，不是这样说，你要说我肚子痛，那他下次就会说我肚子痛。如果你一开始就说什么叫肚子很好笑，这样就不行哈。Okay, right. So that's translanguaging, a very helpful technique in introducing EMI in your classroom.Okay.
所以 EMI 也代表了我们说用 translanguaging， 它除了是代表了对学生这样子的一个包容度，那其实对老师可能也是一样的，因为就像刚刚庄老师讲的，我们其实每一个专业科目我们有学习的这种语言的对象，我用中文学的或是我用英文学的，我可能会比较熟悉用那一个语言来表达。那老师在做双语教学的时候，其实他一定也有一个转换的需求。
也是，对，我觉得这都是可以容许的。你要把你的教学发挥到最大的作用，而不是大家就是卡在那边。
是，那我们在线上呢，我们在聊天板，如果您也看得到的话，我们叶老师呢也问了一个问题，他说 ，Do you think bilingual 这个 Chinese 加 English 这样的一个 education can be succeed in Taiwan？ 那可能是怎么样的一个过渡？可能你就加强跟我们补充说明一下，你可能觉得会是一个什么样的情形？
我觉得其实是一个可以成功的。我觉得我们的学生呢，他们的认知都是很好的，但是他们的产出是不够的。那这样子的情况下，我们如果能够加强他们的产出，就是老师帮忙他们加强他们的产出，协助他们，我觉得是可以很成功的。因为就我在英国教书的经验呢，欧洲的学生他们是很会讲，但是他们讲的是没有内容的，他们就是会讲。好，但是中国的学生或是台湾的学生、日本的学生、亚洲的学生不敢讲，但是万一他们真的被迫讲了之后，他们就会支支吾吾讲出来都是重点字。那所以我们要怎么样帮助他们、协助他们，让他们度过这个过程，让他们能够顺利的表达。我觉得这个是可以成功的，尤其是台湾的老师非常非常的认真，老师可以达成，学生也可以达成，我有信心。
所以也就是说，如果我们是从内容跟内涵出发的话，那就像庄老师说，其实学生不会的就是产出的那一块，其实不见得是他不懂，而是他没有办法说出他懂的事情。那如果双语教育是从内容来出发，而不是从语言来出发的话，那么焦点的转换，其实这个过渡期可能会更快的被通过。这样
是，对，是。
那趁大家还在想问题，David 老师是我们淡江大学的老师 ，David 老师，您来吧。
哦，好呀，听到吗？
是，听到了。
OK， 我只是在想，从内容出发，当然，我觉得刚刚在讲里面，其实有一个很重要的点是，到底是什么样的 level 适合做 EMI 这件事情。因为你的内容的严肃程度跟困难程度会直接影响到学生是不是能够在那个过程当中去同时的，就好像这有一点我们讲 cognitive overloading，
对
，right， 所以就是当在做这件事情的时候，如果那个 content 是比较 acceptable 的 ，OK， 那你在那个时候你有这样子的 double loading 的时候，基本上是 maybe I don't know， 也许可以去让两边都达到一个 some sort 的 balance。但是如果那个 content 可能是比较困难的 然后在 language 也不是那么熟悉的情况下，我总是觉得会两边都没有达到。
谢谢。
我想要知道老师你的想法是什么？
谢谢 David 老师。所以呢，我觉得这个就是备课的重要。你知道接下来这一个时间，接下来的这一堂课或者是你接下来的这个学期，学生要学的东西有什么样的困难度，我相信老师都知道。那我自己会这样子的，因为我也是有很多 international students， 我有 native speaker students。但是一样 ，native speaker students 他们的专业度其实也是不够的，即使是他们英文很好。那 international students 他们不仅专业度，可能有时候专业度够，但是他们英文不够，或者是他们专业的英文是不够的。那我都会在学期一开始，我会给他们一个 which I would say bilingual glossary。我会把一些重要的字我先挑出来，重要的 idea 我先挑出来，我用英文写好，然后我就请他们自己去查，他们可以自己翻译也好，要 make a note 也好，他们要去了解大概这几个 term 的意思是什么。然后当然接下来我们就可以比较顺利的进行我们的课程。然后呢也许这个课程是很难的，但是我觉得我们要回归到一个教育者的本质，我们是要很厉害的把这堂课都把它讲完，还是我们要期望学生能够学到多少？所以我觉得老师的备课事前的准备是非常重要的。那老师只要背过一次之后就会比较轻松，这是我教了这么多年下来我发现的。我在讲到一个什么 idea 的时候，他们就可以 refer back to the glossary, so they know what I was talking about。 所以这是我给老师的一些建议。当然我们说内容跟英文，其实我们教内容，但是我们不是英文老师，我们不是要教他们英文。可是这样的专业英文需不需要？需要。你平常的日常对话 OK 啊，可是以后他要读原文书或者是什么文章，或者是要出去跟人家 present 他专业的英文的时候，这一块还是不太够的。所以我们是经由内容来顺便提点他们的专业英文，是这样子的。
我想钟老师现在的回答其实也扣了刚刚我们一开始我提到的这个 Translanguaging 的部分。也就是说，如果我们没有非常的坚持说全部用英文，然后学生全部要懂我的英文，或是从我的英文去懂这些内容的话，那么它的门槛会低一点。那对于双方的对于内容的理解跟语言的表达，可能就会更为我不能说轻松，而是更为有效率一点。对。那所以我会觉得过来可能是我们要去学习怎么样用 Translanguaging 这样的一个方法在课堂上的一个教学。
其实 Translanguaging 它不是突然在那边发生的是老师就要先计划好的。作为一个教育者，我们应该要知道我们接下来这堂课我们要做什么东西。也许这个事情这个 term 他可能在那边他不知道，你就要适时的想好这个时候我要用中文来解释，之后我再用英文来加强。所以 Translanguaging 不是 spontaneous, it's being planned, being structured。Okay.
好的。那我们在聊天板上还有几个问题。那还有一个问题就是说，我们已经都成人了，那我们也知道语言学习是小时候会比较有效，那现在都成人了，要怎么样去克服，或者是说，把我们的脑变成一种更可以接受英文的脑袋。
所以这个就回到我刚刚的问题，你觉得怎么样是 bilingual？ 其实英文要不要非常流利，你的 accent 要不要非常好，其实不是那么重要。我觉得我们成人比较吃亏的一点就是你的口音可能没有像小朋友刚开始学那么好，可是我们成人对语言的认知是一定够的，我们可以把我们对 language 1 的认知转到 language 2 去学。你就想language 1 我是这样讲的， language 2 也许我可以这样组织。所以在文法结构上呢，或者是 context 的了解上，成人是比较深刻的，比小朋友更深刻。所以呢，我觉得永远都不会太晚。我的英文也很晚学啊，我也是到国中1年级才开始学的。 所以永远都不会完。那bilingual不是你一定要我讲的 balance bilingual， 我刚给了大家那么多的例子，这些都可以是 bilingual 的。来，
那现在有下一个专业的我所谓专业就是在专业学科上的问题了。那我们学英文用英文教，那现在有很多中文的老师，他说我要教中文，我怎么样用英文教中文？我们以台湾的环境来讲，
用英文教中文哦。
对，
用英文教中文就是像我们用中文教，在台湾用中文教英文是一样的啊，对不对？来，所以
妙琪，你来陈述一下。妙琪是一位
不好意思，老师好，那个因为我现在是国语文的中央辅导团的咨询教师，所以我们国语文组我们非常的焦虑，我们没有要用中文教英语，但是我们是在想说我们国语文的教师抱歉，就是我们国语文其实没有要用英语来教国文，但是我们会不知道我们要怎么转变我们国语文原本的教学，才能让我们不会受到英语学习上面，然后产生一种语文排挤的作用。谢谢。就是比如说我们可能过去很重视一些知识性的考试，那我们可能现在要怎么调整？好，那请老师分享您的经验，谢谢。
我不好意思，我这里讯号好像不太好，我没有听得很清楚老师的问题。
好，老师抱歉，就是我再陈述一次，就是我们国语文还是会用国语文教学，但是因为当我们其他的学科都改用英语教学的过程中，我们国语文本来的教学会受到一些排挤作用，那所以我们原本的母语该怎么样去调整我们的教学方向？这是我们国语文组的一个焦虑。
为什么会有排挤作用呢？老师，
因为现在各科都要融入英语教学，那所以就变成国语文教学的时间变少了，然后他们在语文应用的时间也变得比较缩短。那学生可能都跑去学英语了，所以我们就是不知道怎么去面对国语文的教学方向。
所以这个是大学吗？大学他们就可以去选中文，
我们现在是中小学组的部分。
中小学组，但是要跟他们说中文很重要啊！我们会讲中文的人有多么的重要，是不是？然后可能在教材上做一些跟国际化接轨的事情。其实我在英国之前教了很多年的中文，我都是用英文来教中文的。我教的对象有时候，比如说是那些情报员啊，还是 BBC 的那些记者啊，有一些很奇怪的地方教过中文。然后呢，我觉得可能就是用内容来用跟比较国际化接轨的内容来吸引学生。比如说他学了这个中文以后，他可以用中文来介绍什么东西，或者用中文来看世界上发生的事情，而不是只是以前古时候发生什么事情，古文有什么。这样子，我不知道有没有回答到老师您要的点，只是我觉得中文非常的重要，所以现在很多外国学生都要学中文，我们要让台湾的学生知道这一点。我一直很愧疚，我的小朋友都不会写中文，
谢谢老师，
所以我很重要。
谢谢老师给我们方向。
好，谢谢张老师。那我们聊天板还有一个问题比较快哈，那他是提到这个 watching films 是不是一个好的学习的方法？那我们线上等一下还有2位可以要实体跟老师讨论的，那就请张老师。
好 ，watching films is a good method, but you need to aware of what you are watching. 你要看电影、看影片是很重要的哦，可以学，但是你要怎么学？你要仔细听他在说什么，而不是只是看过去就好了。我会建议大家看电影的时候呢，你如果可以把英文字幕开出来，你就把它开出来，一边看一边听。你一边看影片，一边看那个字幕，看你学到了在讲什么字。第2次你就把字幕关掉，再听听看有没有办法听得懂。好，现在的影片都做得非常的好，它都可以快，它速度都可以是快或慢，你可以自己调整速度。要是听不懂的时候，你就把它 调慢一点，仔细的听听看。然后这个字我听不懂了，赶快再把字幕打开啊，原来是这个字，其实就会进步的很快，非常的快。
好，那我们请那个张丽玉，我们的听众张丽玉是位老师吗？张老师
是的，钟老师好，很开心就是今天可以聆听你的讲座。那我先稍微讲一下我自己的背景，我在台湾，我本来是英文老师，然后我后来到英国的 Warwick University 去念了戏剧教育，但当初念的戏剧教育最主要是想要回来把它应用在英语教学，因为其实戏剧可以提供英语非常好的一个语言学习的一个情境。那没有想要回来台湾之后，我后来就进入戏剧的领域。那隔了10多年之后呢，正好因为台湾开始有双语教育，所以我就在4年前开始陪伴台湾的老师，在双语教育的这一个领域里面开始进行一个陪伴跟自己实际的一个教学。那我想要回应的是刚刚妙琪老师的一个担忧，那也是我这4年来在台湾双语教育里面看到的一个现象。我不晓得说我这个担忧是不是有跟刚刚妙琪老师要讲到的一件事情是一样的，因为我们虽然说它是一个双语教育，但我在台湾的这个教学现场会很常常看到的一个状况是，老师们可能在某些讯息上面，或者是我们传统英语学习的一个认知的一个自我认知，他会在教学里面让中文的存在是渐渐消失的。所以我会看到老师们的学习单，或者是老师呈现的这些PPT 的一些内容里面，它的中文是会不见的，只留下英文，甚至老师会觉得说那个英文字那么懂，学生不可能不会，所以就没有出现中文。那我想这应该是妙琪老师刚刚在担心的一件事情是，这也就是台湾开始进行双语教育之后，开始排挤了孩子中文学习这件事情的一个潜在的危机。那我们也都知道，其实台湾的孩子小学1年级的时候必须要学注音符号。那我们也知道有不少的孩子小学1年级之后，他的注音符号不见得每个人都有学会。那我有在教学现场看到是1年级的课程里面，老师让孩子看到了投影片，他不晓得什么原因避免出现中文，他会用图像去代替，让孩子去理解那个英文字的作用，但是图像本身不够精准，所以孩子常常都是在一个猜测的状况底下去猜那个英文字的意思。但1年级的孩子他连26个字母都还不会，所以那个字对他来讲其实也是一个没有意义的一个符号。那我的担心就在于说，如果台湾的老师误以为双语教育是以英文占的那么大的比例，然后在某一些我不知道原因的状况底下，让中文甚至注音符号都消失了，那就有可能会像刚刚妙琪老师提到那个现象，是他不但排挤了孩子的中文学习，我觉得他甚至影响了台湾的孩子在台湾受教育的一个基本的权利。因为我觉得台湾即使因为英语融入，也不应该去减损孩子应该需要有的领域知能，更何况 first language support 是一个非常非常重要的，让孩子在教学里面，在学习里面可以得到自信。因为老师刚刚有提到说 affective filter 也是很重要的一件事情，孩子他在不懂语言的状况底下，他可能表面上看他不会讲他不懂，但是他内心会因为看不懂这件事情累积了很多的挫折跟沮丧跟焦虑。那这也是我在台湾教学现场里面我觉得很不安的，因为台湾的双语教育非常重视的是一个认知跟语言学习的表层的一个呈现跟 output， 但是我们真的很忽略了在这个英语融入的过程当中，孩子的一个内心的情感这个层面的因素。OK， 所以我不晓得说刚刚我刚刚这样的观察是有呼应到妙琪李老师的一个观察，这样。好，以上。
谢
谢张老师的回答。这的确是我们现在好像现场大家会矫枉过正的地方。
像我就比较了解老师要问的方向了。那我讲一下英国，比如说我孩子读的学校是双语学校，欧洲学校，所以他们的一半的时间是用英文上课，另外一半是用法文或者是西班牙文或用德文上课。那老师怎么样在这2个老师？英文老师跟法文老师怎么样在他们的教材上取得连结，不要重复，但是要教的也是相似的东西。这我只是举一个例子。那我刚刚想到的是，各位老师一直说这种政策台湾要我们怎么做，这种叫 top down right top down policy。但是我现在我自己在做的这些数位多语教学这些，我们看的是一个 root up， 我是从根做起的。老师，你在这样的政策之下，你有没有办法把你的国文、中文的，你再把它塞回去啊 root up。然后呢，我们现在我现在在推的一个还是一个叫做 stir the onions， 炒洋葱。你就想办法把所有的东西炒在一起吧，把你的中文放进去，怎么样把你的中文的教育跟英文双语教育并存？我觉得这个是老师们你们在教学的设计上可以讨论出来的一个方法。谢谢。
好的，谢谢大家给我们的一些建议想法。那我会再跟我们央团的其他老师做一些研讨，说我们国语文的教学怎么让现场的老师可以不但跟国际接轨，然后也能够弥补我们现在双语教学下就是这种国语文情境我们就是再把它填补回去，这样。谢谢。
谢谢张老师。那个钟老师呢？啾啾，
对，我觉得很开心看到大家都这么有热忱的对我们孩子未来的语言教育在努力，然后我相信各位老师一定可以用一身好功夫炒出一盘很好吃的菜。
好，谢谢钟老师。我想钟老师是用极度乐观的态度来面对我们很多的困难，那我相信我们也是一样哈，不管在教育现场的，不管在哪一线，然后扮演什么样的角色，面对什么样的专业，那我也经常跟身边的老师说，我们要用极度乐观的态度去面对困难，因为我们没有极度乐观的时候，我们其实没有办法克服外在环境的给予种种的压力或限制。那在这样的一个同时，其实我们要更认识这些困难的缘由，要去更认识我们身边的这些我们所谓的困难跟限制是什么。那它可能是政策面，可能是环境面，因为我们没有双语的这个所谓的文化，我们没有外国的文化在这边。那在这些东西其实是我们个人没有办法去理解、去解决的事情。但是我们可以做的是什么？我们可以做的是在身为第一线的老师，那我们的教学方法，那学生学习的也是有它的方法跟策略，那这些原理原则跟方法都是我们可以掌握的。那我们的极度乐观应该是落在这边，就是说我们可以极力的去做到我们能做的事情。那甚至到沟通表达，刚刚钟老师跟我们讲了很多次，就是说其实在课堂里面，不管是老师端或学生端，那沟通表达非常的重要，就是说我们怎么样表达一个内容，学生怎么样学到这样的一个内容，那这个过程其实是更为重要，而是老师身为一个老师在教学的这个所谓教学设计跟策略的时候，是我们可以掌握的。那钟老师刚刚在演讲里面提到了 affective filter。Affective filter 我们用白话文来讲，就是你越害怕就越讲不好，就像我今天这样，我越害怕我就没有办法讲英文。好，那我们说最不要脸的时候，你其实是更能够表达得很好，因为当我们不放下了所谓的文法跟这个心理障碍的时候，其实我们的沟通其实是别人是可以听得懂的。那我想我们抱持着这样的一个心情来面对这样的一个双语的学习，可能是当下我们可以做到的事情。好，那当然它不能解决所有的事情，但是是我们能够做到的。那我们在结束之前，钟老师要不要再给我们一两句话您想留给我们的？
就是我看到各位老师非常的热心，非常的对未来这个情况很焦虑，也很认真想要克服。那我觉得我不是极度我乐观，但是我也知道这是的确会有一些困难。其实在每个社会每个政策的转型都是这样子的。我记得我以前去读双语教育博士的时候，我觉得读这个在台湾是没有可能有什么发展的，怎么可能双语会在台湾出现呢？然后到现在双语已经真的渐渐开始呈现了。那为什么会要做这个东西？就是跟世界接轨。我们把学生送出去，我们要出去，也要让人家愿意进来。所以各位老师，我觉得你们都不要担心太多。那我觉得可能也许就多办一些讲座吧。像我们这种在国外也许有经验的人，可以很乐意跟大家分享。针对某一些，比如说备课该怎么备啦，或者是有什么技巧可以提点大家的，就大家 networking、resource sharing and hold hand in hand to go through this difficulty。 So I'm very happy to help. And I just 我刚刚把我的那个 email 放在这边了，因为我有看到老师问我那个 digital storytelling 这个 project， 我已经做了13年了。那我今天没有时间分享，可是我很愿意把一些资料寄给老师。那如果老师们有任何的问题，都很欢迎就是 email 给我。
谢谢庄老师。我们呢，中央大学呢，因为我们的语言中心因为知道我们有今天的讲座，所以呢，就在很快的时间呢，也跟钟老师约了下个礼拜到中央大学也来跟我们 EMI 的课程呢做一些讲座。那我相信有更多的学校、更多的老师有这个需求，那我们就用那个钟老师给的 email 哈，好好跟他联络了哈。那最好的演讲呢，就是听众带着问题来。带着更多的问题回去啊！那今天的互动非常的热闹。那现在各大学进行 EMI 的这个计划呢，有许多非需要努力跟学习的空间。那就像钟老师说的，我们就可以 networking hold hand in hand， 那一起来做这些事情。那未来呢，我们一定也会跟钟老师有更多密切的合作跟联系。那可以请教钟老师更多的问题。那今天因为时间的关系，我们今天已经 over 了15分钟了。那所以我们呢讲座我先到这边呢跟各位告一个段落。那再次谢谢钟老师，期待很快的可以跟你相见。
谢谢，
谢谢大家，
谢谢大家，谢谢。